Welcome to Ryan's Running Reviews in partnership with Roadrunner Sports, and today we are taking a look at the completely redesigned Brooks Glycerin 21 StealthFit edition, and we're also going to compare it to the Ghost 15. Let's run with it. Before we get started, I do want to say these shoes were provided to me by Roadrunner Sports. However, no one had a chance to preview this video, and this file synopsis is my own. I'd also like to say please leave a like on the video and consider subscribing. Here we go. If you're not familiar with Brooks running shoes, the Glycerin is one of their thickest options. Great for runners that want a lot of cushioning underfoot for those longer runs, or for people that are just on their feet all day long. Now, the Glycerin 21 comes in 4 different versions, so I'll do my best to explain them. Now, the shoe I have in my hand is the Glycerin 21 StealthFit, which means the upper is going to be a knit material and slightly more snug. The midsole is exactly the same as the Glycerin 21 original, which has a more traditional engineered mesh upper. And then for the final 2 versions, we have essentially just the stability editions of the Glycerin in both the original and the StealthFit. Now, they add the term GTS at the end, so Glycerin 21 GTS, and that GTS stands for Go To Support. And all of that means, and this pretty much goes for most other Brooks running shoes, especially the stability ones, means they add a guide rail on the medial and lateral side to keep you going the correct direction. So the midsole will look quite similar, but we'll have some walls of foam towards the back part of the shoe to give you support if you happen to need it. But with all that being said, today we're taking a look at the Glycerin 21 StealthFit, again with that knit upper, and that features the same exact midsole as the original Glycerin 21. Now, I'm also going to bring in the Ghost 15, which is kind of like the smaller sibling compared to the Glycerin. So the Glycerin is just a thicker version of the Ghost, and yes, there's some key changes, which I will talk about. But the Ghost is their classic, traditional, neutral daily trainer with a moderate level of cushioning, while the Glycerin has a max level or ultra max level of cushioning. All these running shoes just keep on getting thicker and thicker. Now, if you're someone who likes the Ghost but wants a stability shoe, it gets a little bit tricky with the naming here. Unlike the Glycerin, which is just Glycerin and then Glycerin GTS, the stability version of the Ghost is the Ghost. However, the stability version is going to be the Adrenaline GTS. So a little bit of a different naming convention. But again, anytime you see the term GTS, just know it stands for Go To Support, and it's the stability version of that particular shoe for Brooks. As far as price goes, the Glycerin comes in at $160, while the Ghost is slightly cheaper at $140. The Ghost 15 comes in at 10.1 ounces and has 24 millimeters in the heel, 12 in the forefoot for that 12 millimeter heel to toe drop. The Glycerin, on the other hand, it got a big update, 2 more millimeters of stack height, now with 28 in the heel and 18 in the forefoot for a lower 10 millimeter drop compared to the Ghost. It's also much lighter, weighing 9.3 ounces for the StealthFit edition and 9.8 for the original. I'm quite happy to see the Glycerin go up in stack height and also down in weight ever so slightly. I think it's a move in the right direction, and when I first tried this on, I was pleasantly surprised, especially by this new updated midsole. The midsole on the Glycerin 21 is still being branded as DNA Loftv3. However, and this is a big however, it feels completely different compared to last year, which I thought was on the firmer side of things. It has been softened up a whole lot in a meaningful way, and in my opinion, feels quite pleasant. It was a fun surprise to put this on my foot for the first time. Now, if you're not familiar, DNA Loftv3 is a nitrogen-infused foam, has a completely different manufacturing method compared to the DNA Loftv2 we see on the Ghost 15 and the Ghost Max, which I guess is the kind of other counterpart to the Glycerin, which I forgot to mention before. So if you like the Ghost and you want to go with more stack height, you can go in 2 different ways. You can go to the Glycerin with the nitrogen-infused foam, or you can go to the Ghost Max with its DNA Loftv2. So it's going to be a little bit heavier if you go with the Ghost Max compared to the Glycerin, which basically the nitrogen-infused foam allows it to be slightly lighter. I really do think Brooks is making a big step in the correct direction with this reformulation of DNA Loftv3. So much so, in fact, they probably should have rebranded it or maybe put some daylight between this and the Glycerin 20, just because the Glycerin 20 was so much more firm and had a completely different experience to what I'm getting with this new Glycerin 21. It has a nice little squish, energy return, and enjoyment. And then also say it just works as just a solid workhorse daily trainer. You can pick up the pace in it if you really want, and if you need to slow it down, there's plenty of cushion here as well. It just kind of gets the job done. Now, if we compare it to the Ghost is a more, again, classic conventional shoe. It's going to be firmer, a lot less compression, a little bit more ground feel, and it's also heavier compared to the Glycerin, which is another big thing too. We get 2 more millimeters of stack height, but then also it comes down in weight. So you kind of get the best of both worlds, and it really does feel quite light on foot, especially for a Brooks running shoe. Now, again, the Ghost, classic feel. I think it does a good job of handling a little bit of everything, but has a much more moderate level of cushioning, which may be what some runners are looking for. But for me, I just found the Glycerin to be so much more enjoyable, and I really do think Brooks has a winner here in a big way with this updated version of DNA Loftv3. I also thought that the rocker geometry was more aggressive compared to prior versions and more aggressive compared to the Ghost. And we also have an updated heel geometry with a little bit more of a curve or bevel to it. So if you heel strike or walk, you definitely will notice that as well. And moving on to the upper, we'll set the Ghost off to the side for now, just because this is the StealthFit edition, which has a completely different feel compared to the classic engineered mesh version, which I do not have yet. Now, because this is the StealthFit version, I've said this before on previous Brooks StealthFit shoes, just fits a little bit snug and the toe box is a little bit pointed. Hopefully that'll be different when we try the more classic upper. I do think the StealthFit version just looks cooler. I will give it that. It looks absolutely dope. I really like the pattern here. You have these heavy synthetic overlays or plastic overlays across the midfoot on both the lateral and medial side to give you some extra support. And the breathability for being a knit shoe wasn't half bad. It's not amazing. I'd probably give it an average rating with these large ventilation zones in the toe box and kind of off to the side as well. The tongue is very elastic and quite stretchy, so it's fairly easy to get your foot in and out of this shoe. The lacing system, fairly similar to what we saw last year. You have strands of rope on both sides and the laces kind of crisscross, so they don't have to go through the upper and then touch your foot at all. It all stays on the outside of the upper. Now, thought the lacing system was decent, but my issue is if you really do have to pull those laces tight, you have a moderate amount of lace pressures because that knit tongue is so thin. We've moved to the back of the shoe. We still have that knit collar. It's not my personal favorite. It doesn't really hurt me or help. It just kind of is there, if you will. The heel counter is also rather flexible with a moderate amount of cushioning. Now, as far as the lockdown goes, I thought it fit true to size. Again, on the more snug side of things, the length was fine, but the lockdown was okay. Typically with these Brooks knit uppers, I do prefer going with the more traditional engineered mesh upper. While I haven't tried the more traditional or the classic original Glycerin 20, I do expect I'll probably like that a bit more just because the lockdown here, just with the elastic materials and the more flexible heel counter, wasn't perfect. It was fine, but I do have a feeling I'll probably prefer the more just traditional engineered mesh upper when that finally comes out. Moving on to the outsole, the big takeaway here is it's an updated compound. They're calling it Road Track, so it's a mix of rubber and recycled silica. It's supposed to help the longevity, but for me, it felt kind of like just a classic Brooks outsole. You do have some moderate flex screws to the forefoot. They connected one of the flex screws to try to stiffen things up a bit. I will say it bends fairly easily, although it is more stiff compared to the Brooks Ghost, which is very flexible in the forefoot. So not too much to write home about here with the outsole other than they updated the rubber compound to Road Track. Overall, I was incredibly surprised here by the Glycerin 21. I think it makes some massive and meaningful updates to the Glycerin 20, and I'll go as far as to say this might be one of Brooks' best shoes, and I'll pick this all day, every day compared to the Ghost. It's lighter, it's more enjoyable, has a little bit more energy return to it, and a slightly more aggressive rocker as well. I'm very excited to also try out the more traditional engineered mesh upper. I think I'll like it just because Brooks typically does extremely well with that, but the midsole here, I think, is a massive winner. So let me know down in the comments, what do you think of Brooks running shoes in general, and what do you think of this update to the long-running Glycerin series? I would love to hear from you. Well, I'm Ryan from Ryan's Running Reviews, and I'll catch you guys on the next one. Thanks.